And right, there you go. All right. I think you're starting, Greg?
Yeah, I'll start. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Greg Nash. So I'm the Power Platform and Power BI user group leader for Melbourne. So that's where we are right now, Power BI Melbourne and Power Platform Melbourne. My background is operational IT. I've been in the sort of IT, enterprise IT game for a long time, sort of comparative recent convert to the world of BI. I only started really doing BI about 6 years ago and almost exclusively, started in the Power BI world. So came up through Office automation and Excel and then into Power BI and sort of, have played around a lot in the space of SharePoint and InfoPath and old sort of Power Apps style technology, I guess you could call it, which Power Apps has really replaced. And yeah, lots of a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, my primary focus has been around analysis and using Power BI as a tool for the last few years, and so that's something that I do now. You can find me on LinkedIn. I call myself the Power BI unicorn. The only qualification for that is confidence and maybe a colourful haircut or something. Paul.
Yeah, well, I'm Paul Nash, and I started off doing a PhD in mathematics and astrophysics, actually, and then I gradually morphed in about '83. When the IBM PC was invented, I thought, gee, this could be interesting. So I've really been in IT since then, and I've been a senior lecturer in IT, and then I joined industry as an IT director, and more recently, though, I've focused in process modeling and business architecture, if you like, that part of architecture that's involved in understanding why you have processes, what they are, how you document them, and how you train people to perform them, and so on, how you change them. So that essentially, when BPMN was first invented, I went around Australia training people in that particular standard, which is the business process modeling and notation, as it's called these days. And it's really the notation of choice for documenting the details of a process, but there's a lot of other things around that you need. So that's really what we're going to be doing today.
Awesome. All right. So, I mean, I guess what I'll do now is I'll cover what we're going to sort of talk about and why are we talking about this? What do you mean by process, Greg? What are we doing? So I'll get you to jump to the next slide, Paul.
No worries.
So when we, like process, for any of you that came to my data ops talk, and I'm obsessed with systems thinking and the flow of work through organizations and all of that kind of stuff that leads into DevOps and data ops, and it's kind of it's a crucial piece of the way that we interact with our organization, right? And I was recently reading a book by a guy called Deming, who's big in the process world, who was the master of quality back in the 50s and 60s. He said that we need to have an appreciation for the system in which we work. It's one of the key pieces of his system is to really understand the system. And being in a place where I do analysis every day, what's the ultimate goal of what we're trying to do is to improve processes, right? And to be able to analyze them and make our organizations more effective and to make more money and to be more efficient. All of those things are the sorts of things that things like current, operational managers, these are the people who are line of business managers, they're struggling with day to day. They're saying, well, we need to optimize our processes. They struggle to make inroads in terms of, the fact that there's so much complexity and dealing with complex systems, and that you can't just design simple solutions to complex problems. And so process becomes a pain point for operational managers, becomes a pain point for people in terms of the way that we can do this. Now, one of the problems is that even though managers are aware of this issue that they have, they want to be able to optimize their processes. They have a problem with the fact that people who are really good at analyzing data aren't very good at sort of understanding processes, and you'll find that there's a disconnect often with data people when it comes to process. They don't really understand the end-to-end process. They're more interested in the local sort of optima of what they do. We're interested in extracting data out. We're interested in, the bits and pieces in terms of actually, analyzing data, but they don't have a good idea of process. So then you talk to your process analysts and your process people. Those process people are really good in understanding that business case or the business process side, but they don't really understand data. And so you end up with this situation where business process people are asking for particular kinds of data. That data people don't really understand what they mean. And you end up then when we see this disconnect happen inside organizations. So there's this disconnect between process and data that really we need to be able to solve to be able to analyze processes properly. The other thing that we need to consider is that all of the technology around what we can do with process has changed, right? So we've got things like robotic process automation has arrived on the scene, which is Power Automate and UI flows and UiPath, and you'll see all of these other automation pieces, right? And so in a funny way, IT has kind of reverted back to where manufacturing was in the 80s, right? What we have is a situation where in the 80s, they have all these like automation robots coming in, and we're sitting here going, we're going to, put all these automatic robots in. We're going to have a chat bot that's going to tell us what to do. It's going to do all these automatic tasks. But to be able to do that, you need to have this clear understanding of what your process is. And you can implement a robot, you can implement an RPA, like an automatic bot that automatically enters something. But if you increase efficiency in one area, it might not necessarily increase efficiency for your whole process, which is exactly the same challenge that they faced in manufacturing when, the goal was written, in 1983 or something. And so we're seeing these same challenges now with businesses trying to optimize their processes, trying to automate their processes, but they have to be able to decide which process do I automate, which task do I automate, and how do I do that? So these tools, even though they're new and they're exciting and people want to go hard on doing automation, they need to have a clear understanding of how their system works before that kind of happens. So we've got these new tools. Those tools, we've got other vendors and people who provide process specialized tools. So process mining tools and process analysis tools and process repositories. All these tools are out there, but they're often limited in some way in their capability. We don't have that. It's really difficult to get the data out and put it into the tool, or, you don't have the flexibility to analyze the process in the way that you want, like you might with Power BI, or you've got a situation where you need to, share the process in a particular way and you can't do that. So they're built for purpose to do a specific task, but they're not really flexible in the way that they do that. So you've got this idea of like process tools that don't really meet the needs of what people are trying to do. And usually you implement it and there's one specialist guy who, knows how to run the process tool, but it doesn't really get a lot of traction in the organization because it doesn't have that kind of that ease of use and sort of that flexible type thing. And really advanced process mining is still sort of considered the realm of like data scientists and advanced analytics people. So the process mining activities tend to go off to them, and there's no sort of operational process mining that's available, like simple process mining. And so we think, based on that, with Microsoft 365, we've got this whole suite of tools, a whole bunch of different things that we can replicate similar sort of functionality that these guys are selling for like these mining tools and process tools are really, really expensive. You can replicate that functionality with the Microsoft suite and your Office 365 tools today without having to go to all that expense. And so that's, that cost of doing, of implementing process, the cost of optimizing process, the cost of fixing processes is usually high, and it's a focus for a lot of organizations. And so, and if you get it right, it can make a huge financial impact on your organization, right? You can actually do amazing things with process. You can take whole sections out of your bottom line and your top line in terms of process optimization. So there's a lot of potential benefit, but it's also easy to sort of waste a lot of money in this space. And I think this is a tension that we see sort of play out in organizations all around Australia and the world. And I think we've got an opportunity to potentially bring some of these, sort of disparate set of tools together into something that is cohesive and can deliver a process in a reasonable way, I guess. I think that's all I had to say on that. Paul, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that's essentially, I guess what we're on about is it possible to use relatively commonly available tools in the Microsoft stack to replicate what the products that are, the process repositories like Signavio, Prime, BitCloud, and so on, and a number of others actually provide for you, but in a slightly more limited way, and for quite a lot more money. So I guess that's what we're thinking, and that's where the idea of this prop data ops comes from. So data ops is all very well, but what if we add process? Then here's a kind of summary of what that might mean. So it's like we've got to be agile, so that we want to use visualization a lot. So we're going to pictures worth 1,000 words kind of thing. We're going to use various views of a process, and then to allow us to understand the context and the process, understand the domain all as quickly as possible, and then gather data, get it ready for transformation. And in this area here, we're using the power of Power BI, and all of the collaboration we're going to use. Again, we're going to use the Microsoft stack, and probably build it all around Teams. But maybe Greg can talk around that.
Yeah, and this is, and maybe coming into to our approach, but this is kind of an taking that idea that, like DevOps has invented, you sort of picking pieces of bits and pieces off Agile, and a bit off Lean, and a bit off the Toyota production system, and a bit off Six Sigma, and really looking for the ones where all the bits and pieces where we can actually optimize our processes using our existing tool set, rather than having to go for specialized one, and then having regular people who are actually participants in the process actually deliver optimizations themselves, rather than having to go off to specialists to do that for you. Cool. Yes. So yeah, go for it.
So here's a bit of a summary of the approach that we're going to go through today. And it relies tremendously on using available tools, but making sure that you customize them for your use. So Visio is great, and it has any number of templates, but almost all of those templates are no good as they stand, because they're often too general, allow for too many things to be on a diagram, or they don't necessarily have everything that you need. So specializing those templates is a vital part of how we approach this process context. So as we'll see, we're going to have ways of showing teams and roles, process groups, and the process itself. And all of those, in my opinion, need tailored Visio templates, so that, and if you go to the trouble of doing that, that means that you're going to have the ability to have a team that's all rowing in the same direction, and your deliverables are all going to look very similar, as opposed to letting people loose with just Visio as it stands, where they could use any template they like and use it in any way they think is appropriate, and everybody's approach will be slightly different. So that's the first part. Modeling the processes, of course, we're going to rely on the features of BPMN itself, the business process modeling notation. Again, it's a very complicated notation. It has hundreds of symbols, but you've got to whittle that down to the ones that are appropriate for doing process modeling in a business context. And even that's a reasonable, as we'll see when we see the templates, is a reasonable number of symbols, but it does mean you're cutting out all of the things that aren't so useful and may confuse people. Another important thing about processes is understanding, and where process meets data, if you like, is processes are always transforming information, typically. And so there's the process view of that, the domain in the process, which we need to understand. So that'd be what I'd call a data domain. Again, we specialize what is a UML class diagram Visio template into a specialized template for that. And that's our the thing that we hand over to the data people and say, well, this is what we call everything. This is what we want. And if we combine that, if you like, with business event analysis and so on, we have a way of getting from the data people exactly what we need to analyze the process. And we'll show you that again in a sort of an overview kind of way. And then it's all about the power of Power BI and the various plugins and things that you can use in Power BI to actually analyze the process using the actual process data of the existing process to help determine what the improvements need to be. So, and then if you like, develop a 2B process with all of that having been as inputs to your decision making on what the new process will be. So that's sort of in a nutshell the approach. Any other comments about that, Greg?
No, I think that covers it nicely.
Okay, well, so more specifically, here are the tools. So I'll hand over to Greg.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those things where, you know, in and of each individual tool does a certain function, but when you actually combine them, you've got a situation where you could potentially, you know, you unlock this feature set that is incredibly powerful for analyzing, like for delivering a particular purpose. And this is one of the reasons why I really like the Microsoft 365 and Power Platform stack, is that they're all in and of themselves modular. They're sort of maintained individually, but you can combine them in these sorts of ways that I think can provide a lot of value to your organization. And it's just really a matter of deciding which pieces to use, which pieces of the puzzle to use, and how to use them. So in this case, we're going to be covering a few different tools in the Microsoft stack. So we've got OneDrive there, which is our little cloud. We've got our Power Apps, Power BI, Microsoft Forms, Microsoft Power Automate, Microsoft Excel, SharePoint, Visio, and Teams. So you can see that we're using a good cross section of the Office 365, sort of, they call it Microsoft 365 these days, stack, combined with all of the Power Platform, well, most of the Power Platform there. So we've got everything, and we could include virtual agents here, like the chatbots as well, as part of this, in terms of the automation piece that we'll talk about at the end. But really, like, you can start to see how, you know, combining these different tools from the Microsoft native Microsoft stack, like a lot of you guys, if you've got an Office 365 license, you've already got all of these tools available to you right now, you know, today. Probably the exception to the rule here is Visio, which is an add-on license for a lot of Microsoft licenses, but it's not overly expensive, and it's really just for your process modelers to do that piece. All the other bits and pieces, in terms of, you know, because it's a little bit more specialized, I guess, a lot of people already have Microsoft Visio licenses as well. So we've really got this amazing set of tools, and we can leverage all of these different tools to deliver a sort of an end-to-end process optimization capability, if you like. And so I think starting out with these tools, the first thing we have to start thinking about is like, okay, if we're gonna create all these tools, we need to start creating templates, you know. And so from a Power Platform point of view, templates are going to include things like PBIT files in Power BI. So you can create maybe a prefabbed Power BI file that, you know, does process analysis. You only need event data in a particular way, and then people inside your organization can use that as a template to do that, or you can knock out the template for the reports that they need and things like that. So templating is going to be really important to, you know, give you that sort of leg up. And I know that we're sort of in the middle of developing a bunch of templates in this space. So I think if you've got, you know, a bunch of Power BI templates that are optimized for analyzing event data and trace data for process. You've got Power BI, Power Apps, prefab Power Apps data collection, and we'll talk a little bit about collecting data in a moment. You know, creating a template that does that, and prefab, you know, Power Automate template. So you can export and import Power Apps. You can export and import Power Automate. So you can provide this set of templates to people, you know, give people a little bit of a leg up in terms of, okay, I'm a business person, you know, business operational manager inside our organization. We need to create you know, like we need to optimize XYZ process. Well, okay, here's a little repository of templates that we've already generated where we're doing this in other places. So I think there's a lot of reusability here, and you can obviously do that with all of this stuff as well.
Yeah, so just to illustrate that, possibly, well, the templates that I need in my role is trying to understand the process context and processes themselves, and the process data domain, if you like, are the Visio templates. So I've just given you a snapshot of the shapes files that I've created. The good thing about Visio is all of this is, you can change this, it's all editable. And you'll notice I've got a value chain, a set of shapes, I've got BPMN diagram shapes. My preference with BPMN is like you can have a lot less of the standard template just has one start, one intermediate event, one end event, and so on. But I like to have them all ready to use and drag onto your diagram. This makes it a lot easier for me to use, but it looks more complicated. All of the different task types are all there to just drag on. You don't have to do anything else other than drag them on and connect them up, kind of thing. And in addition, all of the different, down here, we've got data objects, and we've even got symbols for pain points and issues and so on. So I've changed that so that it's as easy as possible for me to use and for a team that I might be looking after, so that they all use this, their BPMN diagramming approach in the same way. And we'll see some samples of the diagrams. In the case of a domain diagram, this is essentially just the symbols you need out of a UML class diagram template. But the problem with the Visio standard UML class diagram template is it has many things you don't need, and it has some things you do, it has the things you do need, but it also doesn't concentrate on the things, and there are some things here like the reading direction and so on that are needed if you're going to do it properly. And so on, so a specialized template there, and then teams, roles, and process groups template I take from the UML use case template, which only just shows the things that we need. If you look at the standard UML use case template in Visio, it's got a whole lot of connectors and things that you never need, and probably shouldn't be there anyway, actually. And so you just use a subset of what you need for the diagram type you want to produce. So that's the starting point. So I guess my advice is get yourself organized, make sure you understand what diagrams are going to work for you, and create specialized templates. And just to illustrate that a bit more, I might just go across to and show a few of these. So let's have a look. What did I do there? No, that doesn't look like it. So here's an example of a template in use. So here are the shapes. If we were to look at the original UML use case diagram, it has the things you might need, but it doesn't. Well, first of all, I like color, so I've colored it. It allows me to mark things with pain points if I want to. So if I wanted to mark pain points, I can do that very easily. I have a stylized way of doing that. And the idea of this diagram is to show what processes there are in a process group and what are the teams or roles that are involved. So you get a bit of an idea of who's doing what with this type of diagram. So it's like a contextual diagram. So that's one thing you might consider in an approach. Another one is this. Here I've taken what is essentially what in Signavio, for instance, is what's called a value chain diagram. So the ability to put shapes like this, these chevrons, on a diagram, have them so that they can drill down with hyperlinks if you want, and show process groups and value chains in a kind of stylized way. This is quite a common type of diagram that you see in the process repositories, and it's not a bad type of diagram to use up at that higher level so that you know what processes are there. There are many other things that I could add to this. So for instance, if you really want to know why do you have the processes, then you should have Archimate 3 diagrams, and again you should tailor those templates for that. So understanding the context is what we're all on about at this part of the our thinking. So I'll just go back to the presentation, and so there's our sample. In this case, hospital processes. We're going to take this process here and have a look at it in more detail. So for us to make progress, to get down to the level where we can actually ask the data people for the right data, we need to map a process, like let's say this emergency treatment process, down to what would normally be called level 4. So you need to be down at the task level, the business event level. So so that's what that's the context, but that's the process we're choosing for this particular demonstration. Again, this is another view of the context, and this is the process we're going to use for the demonstration, the emergency treatment process. And it has 4 roles in it, and you'll see that when you see the more detailed BPMN diagram, you'll see there are 4 lanes in the pool, one for each of these roles. And those roles can be either individual roles or they can be teams. That same symbol I would use for both teams and roles. Obviously the details of how you get the information to map the process down to this level, I'll leave a little bit vague, but here is an example of the type of BPMN process that we would need to create. Notice it's quite low level. It's showing who's involved, what they do, and in BPMN you can have manual processes, you can have what are called user tasks, or these are manual tasks and user tasks. These use some kind of system, and typically with those you've got the flow of information from that task to a system. So it's very common in BPMN to have at the bottom of a diagram the actual IT systems, and any information going from the process, which is inside this pool here, to those systems is shown explicitly with these messages. So notice they touch those systems at various points, and they are the beginning of every time one of those messages touches the systems, it's essentially got a date timestamp associated with the information that's being entered into the system. So they're going to be, that's what you're going to be talking to your data people about. Again, as we go through here, if you like, there's the emergency patient, they arrive. There's a lot of manual tasks here, and we'll talk about those later. Notice I've got what they use. There's a COVID-19 tracing list, a registration form that they fill out manually, and then they sign off on the COVID-19 tracing list as they leave the hospital. They're seen by the doctor. At the moment, the doctor doesn't necessarily have all the information he needs, and we'll find later that they've probably taken a lot of time to do what they do. There are 3 main outcomes. You either leave the hospital possibly with a prescription, passed away in the, which is an unfortunate outcome, in the hospital, which that's that outcome, not tremendously common, hopefully. And then, or you may be admitted to the hospital, and there's a little bit of complexity in that. You have to wait for a bed to be allocated, one to be available, and you have to be, as a patient, have to be ready. When all those 3 events happen, you can then be admitted to the hospital.
Just a couple of questions coming through, Paul. Sorry, I'll just interrupt.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. So I've got one from Ross. He just says, what do you think about automated discovery solutions as a starting point like Fortress IQ? So that looks similar to we're going to talk a little bit more about the data side of this in a sec, Ross, and maybe that'll answer that question in a bit more detail, where we're taking the documented tools and the automation a little bit together. And so something like automated process documentation tools can be used as a complement to existing enterprise tool. Yeah, I think that's a good response as well there, Conrad. So I'll show you what we're doing in the Power BI side, and you might find that there's a lot of replication of what is happening in Fortress there as well. And then piping out to AI and all that kind of stuff is part of it. Another thing, Paul, this one will be for you. How do you approach process documentation in agile development? So, you know, do you have an agile approach for producing these BPMN maps?
Myself, In the Agile team at Telstra, I was working in an Agile team, and we still did the maps to more or less this level of detail, so that the Agile team had the context, so that we were working in parallel with the Agile team, so that they had this as an input to their thinking. But we did use a lot of whiteboarding and all that kind of thing and they weren't necessarily shown in this kind of final format. They often were just images from a whiteboard, actually. The content is important, but the form isn't tremendously. It depends how long you want this deliverable to last, if you like. So we actually did go to the trouble of doing these because we had a process team working in parallel, but it depends on what resources you've got. But the important thing is these need to be available when the rest of the Agile team need them. So, for instance, these basically are the basis of user stories, where these hit here. So that they go hand in hand with the user stories. And the only other thing I didn't point out is if other systems are sending data to the system that you're interacting. So the process is interacting mostly with one system, but there's this system, which we've called WardSys, that's actually sending information to that system. So you do sometimes need to have a bit of a broader view, and that's the process. The team actually carrying out this process, these roles here, may not be as interested in these bits, but we would be, because we're interested in where the data comes from. So anyway, that's a little bit of an overview of that. Over to you, just to talk about the...
Oh, yeah, cool. So, I mean, this is really, it's about collaboration and understanding. You know, like this is where we're still at the point of trying to understand what the processes are, and then trying to focus our resolution on a particular piece and trying to, you know, get that piece right. And obviously a big piece of that is collaboration pieces, and you know, if we just took a data centric view of this, then we're going to get, you know, and we'll see in a sec, you kind of get a bit of a spaghetti diagram of events. And so, you know, how is this process supposed to be working? How does the business view it as it is working? How do we socialize this process with other people? How do we help train people in what the process is supposed to be? And then also, how do we collaborate in making these maps right? And so this is where we can take advantage of Teams, right? So Teams and Visio integrate pretty nicely. I wouldn't say they're perfect, but you can, you know, someone like Paul who's out there in the business, you know, trying to understand these processes. He's developing these BPMN2 maps, these sort of swim lane diagrams. He's forever, you know, refining his understanding of what's going on, producing new versions of the maps, and you need to be able to collaborate with all of the different process participants and sponsors and all the different stakeholders of that process. So this is where we can use Teams for that, right? And so you've got the ability to add commentary to processes. You can edit directly inside the Teams experience. And so this is where we're starting to see this ability to, you know, someone who's a knowledge worker like Paul is able to create stuff, but then also share it to the organization as well. And so then we're starting to get this idea of, okay, this is, you know, socializing is one of the most difficult things, is giving everybody that, you know, appreciation for the system in which they work is key to being able to make any kind of improvement. And if we just showed them the data, or we just showed them, you know, a spaghetti diagram of all the events that happen and the way that they relate to each other, it's going to be less meaningful to them in terms of their actual understanding. So this is where I think that there's benefit for both. But yeah, collaboration piece is done in Teams, and obviously with all of the rest of this stuff, we can embed apps inside Teams, like Power Apps. We can embed Power BI reports inside Teams as well. So you end up with this one-stop shop where people can kind of collaborate, talk about the process. They can be in virtual teams. They can live across the whole value stream. So they can all live in different silos, but they can collaborate together on Teams. So I think Teams is a key piece of this puzzle in terms of getting people to talk about their processes end to end in terms of the way they deliver value, not just in their own little world and their own little silos.
Yeah, well, my last role, it was entirely done on Teams because we're all working from home, so it was the only way we could. So the question is, how do you get information about who's doing what and who's using what systems to people who don't necessarily know that, like the data people might know that the database schema for one of the systems, but they don't know the context necessarily. And, you know, obviously the review cycle, which many process repositories and management tools have, you can replicate completely inside teams. So that's the idea of that.
I've just got a question from Hamza. Hamza.
I have two questions. So one is that, like, as I still need some more clarity. Like, when in the start of the project, if creating these detailed diagram itself takes a lot of time. So, and then what I have noticed with my experience is that at times in the beginning, people don't know much about what they actually want. So, like, what level of detail you advise for this? When we are initially starting the exploratory phase. And also the second question is that how, like, is in your experience these kind of diagrams, how do you find the business people, are they able to understand these kind of diagrams, or do we need to do or do you have to dumb down them like the ones that you are just showing here?
Well, yeah, this one is a more complicated one. Typically, you need to walk the business through them, but there's no doubt in my mind that to have a reading knowledge of BPMN is much easier to acquire than a writing knowledge, if you like. So yes, look, obviously if you're going to be showing these to the business, they need to be expecting, you need to prepare them a bit for these diagrams if they're going to review them properly and be able to tell you that, I mean, it's very important that they have the content is accurate. It doesn't have to be totally complete necessarily. There might be some things that are not so relevant for improving the process that are still done in the process. The other thing I'd say is that people need to be trained to do these. They actually don't take as long as you think, but they certainly aren't instantaneous. But you do need to be trained in how to use BPMN properly. Otherwise, you will take a long time to do these if you're not used to using them on a sort of more or less daily basis. So yeah, there's a number of things there. It is important to understand the process, and some time needs to be put into it, but you've got to try and minimize that time.
Do you find yourself in a situation where you start off with like a low resolution version where somebody, you know, just knocks together a simple flow chart inside?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you like, the way I haven't gone into the whole process of creating like a level 4 diagram. Let me go back to like this is the end of a process, but to start off with, I might well have just one box here, one box there, one there, go off to these people, you know, that we'd have discovery sessions with those individually or together, and they'd clarify exactly what actually happens, and you'd put it into, you might even just whiteboard it if you're in a non-COVID-19 situation, or draw it if you've got a tablet kind of. I've got a tablet laptop, so I can actually draw while people are watching if I want to. So you've got to develop techniques for doing this quickly with people, and understanding, like getting the bits that they know into a form that others can understand.
Yeah, I think to put this in a Power BI context as well, you know, this is when we do data models, you know, like when I'm modeling out somebody comes to me and says, hey, I've got a new report and I need you to do that. Then the first thing I do is I hand draw a data model. Like I say, okay, what are we reporting on? Okay, you want, you know, sales and products and customers. I'm creating boxes for each of these entities. I'm thinking they're going to be the dimensions. I'm going to, you know, talk to them about what's the transactional data and how, you know, what are those fact tables. I think there's a similar sort of process in terms of that, where you start off with a sketch, you kind of, you know, rough it all together, and then as time goes on, as you discover the idiosyncrasies of that particular data set, oh, it's shaped this way, oh, it's shaped that way, you can refine that model down into the thing that actually, you know, represents the true model you need it to be. I think that approach is, in terms of agile and sort of staying, you know, trying to deliver as much value as you know then, and then refining is the way to go.
Yeah, well, the other thing that I'd say about this is you're only going to go to this trouble for this process if there's a payoff at the end. So as we'll see when when you take over, Greg, and show how we use this diagram inside Power BI. We've gone to the trouble of doing this diagram so we can understand the business events and then get the right data and then display it inside Power BI. And we're doing all of that because there's a payoff at the end. And you know, this is an illustrative process, but typically in processes, you can be burning hundreds of thousands of dollars. If this is a process that's replicated all around Australia or whatever it might be, you can be burning many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars by a process that's inefficient, by using a process that's inefficient. And it's definitely worth trying to understand that process down to this level for detail if you want to improve it. If you try to improve it without this, the problem is that you're not understanding the process. It's hard to choose the right things to improve. But anyway, they're the reasons why you might go to this trouble. And you're not doing that for every process, by the way, only the ones that you've chosen. Cool. So that's what I'm thinking there.
We spoke about teams. Cool. So then it's a matter of understanding, okay, we've got a bit of an idea around what this process is, and this comes down to refining that resolution, is understanding like what tools do we have to survey participants, understand what's going on with stakeholders. You want to know where the pain is, and you want to be able to do that in an easy way. And so in the Microsoft 365 stack, we've got a few tools that can help us do that. Microsoft Forms is a great example of that. So you can just quickly knock up a form in this, process effectiveness survey, give us a sentence on how you think, this sort of process works, or this step, or whatever, something that's appropriate, get them to rate it. And then what you can do from that is start to understand then, okay, where's the real pain points for the participants in the process, and start to refine your thinking and understand which pieces you want to concentrate your efforts on.
Yeah, this is an example of making it easy to get input from a disparate number of people in all sorts of locations, which is pretty useful, particularly in a COVID-19 scenario where everybody's working from home.
Yeah, and there's a ton of automation you can put on the back of forms as well. So you've got Power Automate in the back end. As soon as that form gets put in, we could throw that into a common data service or an Excel spreadsheet or a SharePoint list or whatever you need to then be able to do your downstream analysis of where those processes are. And you can use that, as Paul will show in a second, start to show that on our documentation.
Yeah, so that's the next bit of the process, if you like. Gather the information about what's wrong and then show that. So here we've got let's say a few pain points shown on a diagram. We've focused on the manual aspects of what the emergency patient has to do when they arrive and when they leave. And just to illustrate, let's say they're the things that we've decided to do something about. And we've used the various inputs that we've got to determine that. So this view of the process is just to highlight to stakeholders what we're going to focus on to improve in the next version. So at that point, not only that, we need to understand, we're also going to look at the process, understand all the business events that happen anytime something happens inside a system, and we're going to gather that data. So in order to do that, we need to have, or it might be useful to have, for instance, a domain diagram, which is like a class diagram that shows all the entities, the associations between them. And this is just an illustrative one to show how you might display that. It's like a high-level conceptual data model, if you like. You sort of need one of those if you're going to talk. The thing that is sort of and that can, by the way, be on a whiteboard, or some kind of electronic board. That's really trying to understand the structure of information that's associated with the process and the domain itself.
Yeah, if you just go back to that slide, just head back one. Yeah, so this is sort of the transition point from Paul to me now, right? So this is where Paul, who's the process person, he's out there in the world, creating, understanding processes. He's going higher resolution on particular processes that might have these pain points, and he can build out this sort of rudimentary understanding of the data domain. So as a data person, I want, this is useful for me because I can start to see now the entities that are involved. We've got hospitals, we've got patients, we've got admissions, we've got staff, and so that's kind of my low resolution start point to be able to bring this in and then start to interpret it with that Power BI or star schema or data modeling lens, that you might want to do. And this is where that we want to give, as process people, we want to give data people as much information as we can in a way that we can kind of understand it as data people, and then transition it sort of seamlessly into our world. So gathering, these kind of data domain diagrams is something that I think, they're sort of, as a data modeling person, I'm like, that's a pretty rudimentary data model, but as a process person, they can produce that for us and start us on our journey, if you like.
Well, the other thing to note is that often I would put the main attributes, the main in the, like, what are the
the different.
Look, I haven't got everything on this, but an admission might have just the main attributes. But the important thing there is that all the names of those attributes are what the business call them, not what their names are in the database, or even necessarily even necessarily on the UI, the GUI, the actual interface that they're using. It's what the business call them. So it's the business domain, the data in the business domain. Often they're using an off-the-shelf product and they put the something or other in this field, even though it's called one thing, they actually still refer to it by the name they've always called it. So it's important to this view of, if you like, information and the domain it's important to be in the business terms, and then you hand over to, if you like, the next world, which is the actual data that's being collected inside actual systems.
Go and get the data step. Yeah, so I mean that's what we have to do now, right? Is that the process people have done their piece. We know where we're looking to get data from. We need to start pulling that event data out of all the different systems. So this is obviously Power BI and is a thing, but don't forget about some of the other tools at our disposal here. So, process observations, this is something that's big in the world of process optimization, is sometimes the data, you don't have the data. Like you don't have a system. Like what if somebody comes in and fills out a manual form and you want to know how often that gets, how long it takes to fill out that manual piece of paper. Well, you need to go in and you do observations, right? So you can build a little Power App. It takes, this example Power App took me, like an hour or something, not even to knock up. And I can select a process. I can add a new observation, hit the start stop button as like a little mini timer. It automatically spits it out to an Excel spreadsheet. And there you go. You've got your observation data in a sort of a structured way that's easy to analyze, that's up in the CDS, so it's easy for me to get to from an analytical point of view, and you're not sort of wrangling, somebody there with a stopwatch and writing it down on a clipboard and then transferring that data to an Excel spreadsheet and then sending it to somebody who can actually put it in somewhere where it can be analyzed. Like bypassing gathering process observations and things like that can be really easy with stuff like Power Apps. Similarly with Power Automate, you've got the ability to go and get data on the next slide, Paul.
Oh, sorry.
Again, yep, we can go and get data from pretty much anywhere. Like Power Automate's got all of these great sort of API integrations. So now we've got all this cloud data, and this is over and above what you can do with Power BI, right? So this is like one of the things that people don't realize is that Power Automate has native API integration for things like OAuth 2 and like more complex API scenarios than Power BI can handle. And so you've got this situation where you can go and get data from sort of complex endpoints that Power BI would struggle with, or it doesn't do the authentication right, or you've got all this stuff. You can do that in Power Automate. Set it up on a schedule. It's totally maintainable. A business user can set it up without writing any code. It's a workflow engine. You can do all your approvals through this. So you can do like an approval process in terms of maybe you want to publish something up to the cloud, but before you do that, it has to go through an approval. Like Power Automate's going to be your friend in terms of gathering data as well, and gathering data from different endpoints that maybe Power BI doesn't have a native thing for. It's not in the data warehouse, and it's not in something that you know that is easy to do, but you need to pull it out on a regular basis. Then you're going to be looking to tools like Power Automate to help you with that, and these sort of workflow tools. And
these two features, Power Automate and Power Apps, essentially replicate the workflow accelerator module in Signavio. So you pay fairly big bucks to have that added to your license set in the Signavio world. Whereas I guess what we're suggesting in the Microsoft world, you've got these two features that allow you to do essentially much more than that particular feature inside Signavio.
Yeah, and then finally, of course, Power BI, right? And so that's if you're a process person and you're here, then this is the tool that's going to give you like pretty much access to anything. Like Power BI has all of that data collection, all of that extract, transform, load capability that we need to be able to wrangle this data into the shape that it needs to be. And I think this is where the process side, like the process people come unstuck is in the data side. They're like, oh, I've got this process. I know that there's all these events in this system, whatever system it is, but then you get the data out, it's not in the right shape, doesn't quite fit into the way that I need to analyze it. And so you need transformation tools. You need to have this ease of use and all these things available to you. And so I'm going to take over for a little bit, and we'll start to look at, and I'm just looking at Fortress IQ as well, so we'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. But we'll talk a little bit about then, okay, what does this data look like? And so I've got this sort of basic analysis Power BI here. This is the Power BI meetup, so I just thought I should show you some Power BI while we're here. But event data and trace data and stuff that comes out of these end systems, it comes to you in a few different ways. And you'll see in this data model, like when I get to my transform steps here, is that I actually have to bring this data in a few different ways to get it to do the thing that I want it to do, and so we can look at these observations, right? So that, that's coming out of that observation app. You kind of get this kind of thing where you get a start and an end for observation 1 and a start and an end for observation 2. And so you have this start and end, this concept of start and end time. It's in terms of managing event data. If we look at some of the other data things, so this is the raw data that I'm getting from, we're looking at our hospital system, right? And so we go to the data team and we say, hey, we're looking at this hospital system. Can you pull all the events out of Regsys? What do you have? And they say, oh, we got a view, this view, and it comes in this form. And so it's got the attendance ID and the patient ID and then the arrival time. And so here's the arrival time and here's the departure time. And then here's all the individual event times, right? So this is when the bed request happened. This is when the bed was allocated. This is when the bed was available. This is when the patient was ready. This is when the doctor was seen. So, I mean, this has all of the information in it, right? And so they're not going to, if you say, oh, that's not quite right, I need it a different way, they're going to be like, well, it's got all the information in it, you work it out, And so what we're tasked to do then is to start think about, okay, how do we optimize this data set for analysis? And you'll find that there's a couple of different ways to do that. And so often what you're going to need to be doing, and so if we start here with our sort of source data, which looks like this, exactly as we were. So the first thing that I did here was I unpivoted it. Yeah. And so often you're looking to unpivot this event data to get you all of the, the statuses. So this is the status and then this is a value. So we've gone from sort of that horizontal view to now a vertical view of the data. And so this is, for anybody that does Power BI all the time, this is what you want your fact tables to be unpivoted and to be nice and easy to analyze. But this presents problems because now if I want to know the difference in time between the arrival and the departure, or the arrival and some other event, then it's not that easy to calculate in Power BI because Power BI is column based. It's not what you do is calculate that as a row. So you could do that before you unpivot it. You could calculate the difference in time between the two things. So you need to think about like the shape that you need to be able to then downstream create the analysis that you want. And so what I've found is that mostly what you can do here is you can add in your sort of arrival times like this. But then what I did was I added in the next step in the sequence. So the next value that happens with the same patient and attendance ID. If there is another step, then we add it here as the next status and having an endpoint here. So to do that, I did, you know, like a kind of a self-merge type thing. So you merge it back in against itself, but you add an index. So I've got a little sort order here, but then I add this index, which happens inside the table. Don't know if we can see that. So you're sort of doing this sort of wrangling where you're adding in indexes into the table to get the next status. And so as we click through the thing here, I've got my first status, and then I've got index 0 and index 2, right? Or index and index 2. Then I self-merge it. So for each one of these attendance IDs, I get the next ID in the sequence here in my merge query. So I do a self-merge, but it's offset by 1, if you like. So then once I do that self-merge, then I get my current status and my next status. And then I just rename everything, if you like, to be next status, clean it up a little bit, remove all these crazy things, and insert some durations. So then I've got my current status, my start time, my end time, and then how long it took. And so that's kind of that's one shape of data that you can use. The good thing about this shape of data is that it feeds nicely into the process mining analysis visuals that we can use, and so we can start to take advantage of using those visuals, and they're pretty cool. Like, you can do some amazing stuff with them. Another way you could do it is you could say, well, instead of having this status and then the next status, this kind of jumps over, like, because what you don't have is when the arrival time ended, you know, like, and it might be that you can't get that data out of the system. Often that's a problem, right? You get your arrival time, you have your start status, and then the status only takes 10 minutes, but then the next status you get in the system is 3 hours. When they see the doctor is actually in 3 hours or whatever. And so you want it to record 10 minutes for the arrival time, and then how long it was in between the arrival and they saw the doctor, because that's an important metric. And then they saw the doctor, and then on average, a doctor takes 15 minutes. So you just put it in at 15 minutes. So you could do the same thing here, except instead of adding the next status, you could just have arrival end time and then add in a generic end time, if you like. It sort of depends on the type of analysis you want to do, and you'll start to see the benefit of that when we start to get into the visual side. So that's one sort of type of status, if you like, which is, you know, start and end. And anybody that has spent any considerable time with me talking about Power BI will know that I'm obsessed with what we call the events in progress pattern, and that's this kind of pattern where you've got a start and end time. Now, if you want to show the number of active events at any given time, then this doesn't work, right? And so then you need to create a different shape of data. And so this is where data starts to get too much for people trying to do this analysis, because they're like, oh, I'm trying to do this, but the data has the start and end time, so I should be able to show you. Well, and they say, well, how many active patients did we have at this time? And you're like, well, oh, I don't know how to do that. I need to do a calculation. And then you try and get the calculation right, and you have to write all this complex stacks. But actually, the easiest way to do it is to create a time-based, like a granularity, you know, and depending on the resolution you want to look at it. In this case, I'm looking at it every 15 minutes. You can do it as a totally different shape of your data, and you can get that calculation really easily in Power BI. And that's got to do with the way that Power BI calculates data, because it's a column-based system and all this kind of stuff. So this is a second view, if you like, of the same data. And this view starts with the date, and then we add the time. So this is every time, every 15 minutes of the day. So I end up for every day in my data set, every 15 minutes. Some people call this like a snapshot table. Some people call it like a, I can't remember the name. It's completely left me, sorry. But it's like a time-based table. So every 15 minutes of the day, you want to capture every event, all right? And so then you merge in your statuses. And when you do that, we're adding in all the statuses that were active at that time. And so I actually don't bring in the IDs, because I want to keep this table as thin as possible, and I just want to count the number of rows. So all I'm doing is just bringing in a row. So when I say expand status, I could bring the ID in here as well. It does take a little while to load though, so I don't want to muck around with it too much. So what I'm doing here is I've got on the 3rd of the 2nd at 12 o'clock, there was an arrival. On the 3rd of the 2nd at 12 o'clock, there was a doctor seen. On the 3rd of the 2nd at 12 o'clock, there was a bed request. And so everything that happened within that 15-minute period gets counted in this sort of telemetry style table. So you're getting the telemetry of the data as you go. And so this is a different shape of the same data, right? But it gives us a different style of analysis. Okay, so for anybody who's not a Power BI person, I probably completely lost you, so I apologize, but I know you Power BI guys are out there and girls, and I know you understand what I'm talking about. So just the quick things on the other data. We've got some activities. We've got that observation data. I don't think I bring that in. We've got statuses, so all the different statuses. I added in a sort order because like they have to, otherwise departure time kept ending up second to arrival time. We've got obviously a date dimension. We've also got a time dimension because we're looking at intraday events and some other bits and pieces to sort of get that going. So, some sort of semi-complicated transformations to get this data in this shape where we've got telemetry and this shape where we've got start and end status. And so with that data now, what we can do is...
Well, I guess a point to make there, Greg, is that those transformations can be reused. Like your starting point is a very common way that data is sent to, that the business will be, extracted data will very often be in one of your initial input formats. And so all of those transformations can just be reused for any other data.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you, as a process person, you say, actually, we want to, look at this other process now, but it uses all the same source systems, I can pull that data now. I just filter out the statuses that I want depending on the source system. So the fact that idea of templating and having reusable queries that can do all this transformation once you get it right, it's a bit of a labor of love getting it correct, but once it's right, you never have to worry about it again for that system. And so you can just pull event data out depending on whatever the flavor of the month is in terms of, which piece we want to optimize and all that kind of stuff, which I think is really powerful. So we kind of put together our data model. So in classic sort of Power BI style, we've got a sort of a star schema type model here. We've got time, we've got status, we've got date, we've got our attendance ID, which I just brought in like this. There's no attendance ID on the telemetry side. We're just counting the number of rows really here. So we don't need that. And as you can see, I've started to knock out a whole bunch of different measures. And so let's have a look at the visual side. So we've modeled the data, right? We got the data out of these different source systems. I'm looking at Paul's process maps and his data domain. I think I've got it mostly pretty much right. So let's have a look at what the process looks like. This does get back to a little bit about those automatic process discovery tools and stuff as well, right? Is that this is kind of what they're going to be doing, pulling that event data out and then munging it, getting start and end events, just like what we did in Power BI, and then analyzing all the different events. And so you end up with this situation where you can look at all the different variants, sort of depending on the types of analysis. I've got some simple analysis here that we've done. It's certainly not hardcore process mining or anything, but I think it's enough for operational managers and people like that to do the pieces that they need to do. And so, this is about doing just enough to get the outcome we want, not having to go too hard on all the different bits and pieces. Sorry, I did mute you there for a sec, Paul. So you need to talk. Yeah.
Yep. No, just very quickly. Another possible use of this is if you haven't got the processes done at all, you can start with a bottom-up approach, and you get the data and you start to investigate these kind of process variants so that you might understand the process even though you haven't mapped it or even So that's another possible way of going. So what we're just showing everyone today is really a bit of a combination of top down and bottom up, which I think is the best way to go, but you can also just start at the bottom, start with the data. Yeah.
Cool. So this is a custom visual that got released by PAF, these guys, PAF here. So PAF are, it's a process mining, Power BI based process mining tool. They have a free visual for process mining. So you can use it, a certain amount of this, pretty much at no cost, which is great. So it's great for doing sort of basic process analysis. There is a license to it if you want to use their advanced features, like they've got all this crazy stuff that you can do with it. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. I find that even just out of the box tool is pretty good. So what we're looking at here is this is the process. And so this uses our event data, that start and end date event data, right? So it's got our start and end, and it creates a little process map of, it's like a network graph, right? So it shows me that there's been 1,500 processes run through, and then there's a 40-minute delay between the arrival time and the doctor scene, and then a 1 hour and 40-minute delay on average for those 1,523 that went through this way. But this is only our our most common variant, right? So this is the thing that mostly happens. 1,500 of them, they followed this path that went arrived, doctor, got a bed request, got the bed allocated, got the bed available, the patient was ready, and then the departure time. But what you can do with this tool is you can expand the number of variants out, so you can start to see the different paths that people have been taking inside the process. So now we're looking at the actual data, right? Don't worry about the theoretical maps and stuff. We're actually looking at this is what the process really looks like. And so this is where we're combining these two things. We start to combine these two things together. And as we drag it out, you can see that this process, you know, if you think of it from a control point of view, this process has got a lot of different potential paths that it can take. You know, like you can arrive and then you can get a bed request and then you can have a bed allocated, and then, or you can have a arrive and then get a bed request and then see a doctor and then do something. And so you can see the arrows going backwards and forwards. You start to see the true nature of this process. And these types of analysis are really awesome because you can sit there with the business and say, oh, did you know that, you know, you had 2 situations where someone had a bed available and then they saw the doctor? And they're like, no, that's impossible. You know, that couldn't possibly happen. And you have all these conversations with the business around. And so this is a great tool for someone like Paul to sit back now and say, okay, this is what you told me the process is supposed to look like. Well, this is what the process really looks like, you know, and you can get that sort of that view of the process in terms of how it actually works. And if you've got those start and end dates for each of these events, you can see how long each event took. You can see it goes red for all the different areas. And so it's a great way to visualize the event data that's supporting your process.
Yeah. So the business, sometimes it's a revelation for them to see some of the paths, because some of them are what I'd call non-conformant paths. They may well be, they may show that the process, that illegal things are happening. You know, people are seeing doctors where they haven't registered, so they haven't, they're not actually officially registered. Anything like that might happen in the wrong order, the data will illuminate. And of course, you won't have shown that. I won't have shown that in my process model because it's not ever supposed to happen.
That's right. And so you can start to see all the sort of the variance that this process starts to do. Another thing that I've done here is I've created a variant calculation. So just if you want to see how I put this together, I use a concatenate-x to actually concatenate all the statuses together as with an arrow. So now I can see, okay, there's 675 that follow this path, and then there's 474 that follow this path. And so we can now slice and dice to see those individual paths and see. So if we want to see this path, I can click on it. It also, you know, affects our visual. I can see how many and when they happened over the course of the day. But also, like, I've got a few different measures here. I can look at lead time. So now I can look at, okay, this is the thing that takes the longest lead time, this particular one. This arrival time, doctor seen, bed request, patient ready, bed allocate, bed available variant, if you like. There's a 5-hour, you know, wait between bed request and patient ready here, right? And so there's only two of these processes, but there's, for some reason, you know, there's a 13-hour, you know, lead time if you happen to follow this path in the last X, you know, period that we're looking at. And you can see when that happened at 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. One of the things you'll really notice here is that this hospital, this is sort of semi-real data. It's anonymized, obviously, but there's some truth to this data, and you'll see that, you know, going to the hospital in the middle of the night is not a great idea in terms of your waiting times. Yeah. And so that kind of makes sense, right? Is that there's not many people around. It takes a long time to see a doctor. Your lead time's going to be 3 and 4 hours to be able to actually see that, to get that doctor visit and actually have that person attend to you. And there's an interesting pattern, you know, as you go through the analysis, you can start to pull this data out and start to look at different, so you can create variance graphs. You could, like, if say Paul was in there looking at your processes at this period, and you want to see the variance, you know, how it was then, you know, was it out of control? And then you do some process improvement, you want to compare the other period, you know, you could set up this kind of stuff. This is a great thing about Power BI, right? You've got all this flexibility to be able to create whatever, you know, slice and dice however you want, in terms of, I just want to see this particular, you know, this particular status, what happened with bed allocated, the max, all-time max for this is 10 hours or something like that. You know, why did that happen? You can do that kind of stuff. Then with our telemetry table, we can start to see now active cases as at a particular period of time, which is the good thing about the telemetry side. So now we can start to see volume over time for different times of the day. And you can see, you know, it's interesting that the first thing in the morning you have a very low volume of people coming through, but then your lead times go right up. You know, it's almost like there's an inverse relationship between the lead time and the volume of people in the hospital, and that's got to do, I think, with like staffing levels. And then, you know, the best time to go to the hospital is when it's busiest. And so, you know, about 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, if you break your leg, you're seen in the emergency department, or you get a bed much more quickly. This will also be because I happen to know for this particular hospital is that, you know, like they're still people are waiting a long time for their bed at this time, right? Because when you arrive, everybody hasn't been discharged yet. They get discharged around this time, and so you have to wait longer for your bed. Whereas by the time you get to 1 o'clock, all the people who are leaving that day have already left, and so you have a much lower lead time. And so you can start to tease these things out of the data, which I think is really interesting. You can look at it, you know, in small multiples like this. You can start to use the AI features of Power BI. You can look at key influences and stuff. You can, you know, bring these kind of things in. So it looks like going during the day is the biggest, like, so this is, you know, that key influencer thing that I love so much for those of you that are keen Power BI meetup people. But looks like arrival time has the longest lead time, or it causes the number of active cases to release. So there's that. We can do decomposition trees. We can, you know, we get the flexibility of visualization is where Power BI has got all of that, you know, got everything over all of these other process tools. And this is where you know, you've got that process ability to do process stuff, but also to be able to use Power BI to do the things that you need it to do. And so, you know, that's one of those really amazing things, I think, is that you can pretty much visualize the data however you want. The other thing that we can do is now, because we put it into Visio, we can overlay our Power BI, our Visio map, our Power BI data with our Visio map. And so now we can start to click through those variants and see the impact overlaid on top of the map. And you can start to use, you know, the data and the map together to sort of tell the story and socialize that. Okay, we showed, you know, how many cases went through, it's changing color. We can map the fields to whatever. So here's so I've got the status is, you know, register patient in the emergency system. I set that as the arrival time, because that's when that event gets triggered inside our RegSys, you know, our fictional registration system. The departure time is when they update the patient record. The doctor scene is when the doctor performs the examination of the patient. But you might, you know, so you can, and this is flexible, we can click this around and change these wherever we want to put them. So you're kind of using that Microsofty integration piece to give you not only your maps now, but then the data overlaid on top of that map, and you can start to have those conversations with the business, which I think is really cool. And, you know, and you can do right down to the data level.
The two dimensions come together.
Yeah, that's right. And
if you've got the trouble of mapping the process, then you really can then utilize the power of visualization in Power BI. So that's great.
And things like that drill through capability. So Saturday at 2:30 a.m. or we've got this weird 5.2 hour, you know, lead time. Let's drill through, and then we're down at the line level data to see what that event was. You know, here's the person, here's their patient ID. We can go and look up. We can talk to the people what happened where this person was sitting in the waiting room for 5 hours. So you've got that capability where you can drill right back down to your detail level of the data as well. So you're now amalgamating your process and your data analysis together in one thing. Paul, do you want to take back over and we'll finish off the presentation? And you're muted.
Yeah, I'll take over. Just give me a second to.
It'll be seamless. I'll just start it here.
Hold everything. Right now.
Oh, look at that.
It's going to. Okay. All right. Now, where were we? Yep. Okay. So okay. So that's where all our effort merges, and out of all of that, you might decide that you want to create a new a 2B process. So just for illustrative purposes, I often just color everything that's changed to green. So we're going to rather than have a manual list for the COVID-19 tracing and for registration, we're going to do all that with, we're going to sort of automate that and whack it onto some kind of mobile device in the foyer. And notice there's a new system being added here. I've called it Reg Mobile. And so stuff is being entered into that, the COVID-19 stuff. And I've highlighted each of the messages in a different color so that it's easy for me to tell the stakeholders what the changes are in this process. So that's if you like, having got all of that data about what's happening in the process. These are the changes that, let's say, we've decided that we need to implement, and mostly that's because we didn't have any idea of how long it actually took for patients to wait, because they signed a manual list up here and they weren't entered into the system to down there. And so the problem with that is that they could be waiting quite a long time before even just to register. So whereas this will capture that extra business event, if you like. So that's the intention of it.
Just a quick question from Sam. Sorry, Sam, I didn't see that come through. But yeah, his question is, does your PathNow visual allow you to see instances where the intended process is not being followed? It does. So that might be a licensed feature. If you want to look into licensing, then we are talking. PathNow's a German company, so they don't do demos in Australia, but I'm talking to them about getting partnership. But you can do conformance mapping. There's all sorts of stuff you can do in that. You can thanks, Martin, we'll see you later. You can do conformance mapping to show two processes side by side and show which ones we're doing, or you can show it goes green along the happy path and red along all the other paths. There's lots of interesting stuff you can do. I found that a lot of the stuff that we are doing, we could set that in the data ourselves though as well. We could say, so I showed those variants, right? And if you just go back to the last slide, maybe Paul, just quickly. So that variant slicer, we could say, well, the top 3 variants there are the happy path, and then we could just color them like that and show the differences between. That would be reasonably easy to do with even the free version of PathNow. So yeah, there's a few options there for showing the conformance and showing the different paths depending on how you want to do it.
Perfect, because that conformance checking piece would be the really curious thing for a lot of people. Yeah, for sure. It's like, which one of these is the one we meant, Yeah. Thanks. Then, so, like you've identified the areas to do it. And in this case, we decided that there was a manual process at the start there. So don't forget, now you can actually use, I am going to post a recording. Yes. Thanks, Preeti. The Power Apps, you can use Power Apps now to then solve that. So you can automate certain processes. So you want to maybe, instead of having a manual fill out form, you create your own little Power App to collect this data and then create automation. And then don't forget about Power Automate Desktop and UI and RPA. So this is the culmination. What you really want to be doing is automating pieces, and reducing those lead times and getting the actual value out of doing all this analysis. Is you want to do that automation piece. And so use Power Apps, develop those Power Apps, and then next slide, Paul, we'll bring Power Automate in. We can put RPA in, and this will talk to legacy systems, right? So if you've got an old clinical system, or they've got an old ER system that's an old green screen where they have to enter the patient details in, set up a Power App that collects the patient details on an iPad when they first walk in, that you have to do for COVID-19 anyway, and then get RPA to have a desktop automation piece that goes around and clicks on all the right buttons and enters all the right fields for you. And so, this is like, we haven't gone outside Microsoft to do basically end-to-end from collecting the process information, mapping it, and then collaborating on it, and then collecting all the data, and then doing all the analysis, and then fixing it and automating it and doing all of those the bits and pieces. So I think there's kind of a compelling story there from a process optimization point of view. So just in conclusion, I guess what we want to do now is, like, what do we need to do to build up our process analysis capability? I think the thing about, like I'm very much of the just draw a flow chart school, and Paul, that BPMN stuff. I think one of the really strong things about BPMN is
that it completely removes ambiguity about the process when it's done correctly, right? And that's one of the key things, is that, you know, like people sort of do a half-assed job of creating a process, and then they draw the 3 boxes and say, oh yeah, first we get the patient, and then we put the patient in the bed, and then we send it off, right? But you actually have to have a notation that can actually removes that ambiguity. That is, this is the way things are supposed to happen, or this is the way we think things are happening. And you can use a proper notation like BPMN to actually to do that. And so I think that's where the strength. So get some training in BPMN, or, you know, talk to your process team about BPMN training and understanding how that works. Set up those templates in Visio. If you're really nice to Dr. Nash, he might share them with you or sell them to you. I don't know what his thing is, but yeah, have a connect with Paul on that.
They'll cost a fortune. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, reach out. Anyone who's interested in them, just reach out to me.
Yeah, awesome. Build out your process repository. So think about how to use SharePoint and Teams. Think about those bits and pieces. Just keep clicking through there, Paul. Get some training, obviously, in Power Apps and Power Automate. I think they're amazing tools for this kind of stuff. Building out those collection forms, using Power Apps templates and things like that to be able to collect data. Build Power Automate approvals. So for data collection, and you're doing all that kind of stuff. Obviously, get training in Power BI. You know who to talk to if you need that. And I'm sure there's any number of other people in the session that can help you in that situation as well. But yeah. Obviously, you know, getting Power BI skills in your team is really good. And so reach out to me, or anything to do with sort of Power Platform and Power BI. That's kind of my bag. And then, get those templates built. And then, you know, like then you've got that end to end, you know, and maybe have a look at your Office 365, see if you can add Visio to it, see what sort of levels you've got in terms of being able to do this stuff. I think that's a really good thing. So there's a few things coming through. Paul, we need your LinkedIn. So if you can pop that in the chat for people. I'll pop my LinkedIn in the chat as well. And yeah, I reckon we'll be just about good for any questions or comments, or is anyone else doing stuff like this where they found some really good stuff that they can share? Is the PBIX demo file available? I could potentially make it available for you, Fabiola. Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll share the PBIX with you. Let me get my LinkedIn. I'll find yours as well, Paul, so you don't have to.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Boom. Yeah. Richard says, great session. What are your thoughts about leveraging data that Cortana Analytics uses? Well, I think the possibilities are endless kind of in this space. If you really want to start thinking about, you've got, this is where like you're using this platform, but then you can start to do things that previously would have been the realm of, you know, you'd have to set up a whole capability just to get ML or advanced analytics or Cortana involved. You would, you know, that's something that, yeah, you just pipe it out with Power Automate or put it in the CDS, and a lot or you have a data flow in Power BI that like all of that stuff is all built into these tools now. And so you've got access to a huge amount of advanced analytics, advanced sort of AI modeling, or you could train ML to do whatever you want. And then not to mention integrating all those other things like, you know, big data things like Databricks and Azure Synapse Analytics, Lakehousing, all that stuff is at your disposal as well. So there's an amazing sort of set of tools available in the Microsoft stack, and you don't even leave the box. You're still inside the Microsoft world. Did I post this? I think I posted it, but it doesn't seem to be. Is that link coming up? Am I just blind in the meeting chat?
I can't, hold it.
Let me try here. Oh, that worked. Okay. And then I'll get to your question in a second, Hamza. So, oh, bless you. Find Paul's thing. Toby, yeah, were you able to quantify how much you improved the as-is process through your new process, and what was the amount? Yeah, we could quantify it because we've got it all there, but I didn't actually put that in. Sorry, Toby, I don't have the exact amount. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, right? Say, so what you would do in that case is that you would use that lead time measure potentially. And so it depends whether you're measuring end to end or that local optima, and usually you want to look at the end to end, you know. And so, but yeah, all that data is already there in that model that I showed. All you need to do is just look at the previous period of time and say, okay, the lead time was XYZ. Another thing we didn't really talk about, which I should have brought in, was the cost of the resources that perform the process, right? And so I actually have that in the model. I should have shown it. It's got, you know, each of those employees cost XYZ per hour, depending on the role that they do. And so what's the impact of changing the role that does that particular task? Or what's the impact of changing how much that person gets paid? Or you can do all of that analysis. You can see the exact impacts. You could use what if parameters to do all of that what if analysis if you wanted to, before you make those changes, so that you can see the thing that's going to have the biggest benefit in terms of actual lead time against the actual data. And so that's where, you know, like, I mean, that gets into slightly more advanced Power BI scenarios, and having a super Power BI guru around to help you with that is going to be helpful. But that's really the idea, is to be able to, yeah, have that. You set it all up, and then when you do your improvement, you come back to your Power BI file and you show this is this was the quantifiable, you know, amount that we improved by in lead time or in cost or in, you know, sort of raw time or whatever's interesting to people at the time. Cool. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'll see if I can make that the demo link, the demo PBIX file. It is, you do sort of need to dive into those little pieces. I'll do that for you as well, Hamza, talking about that event table. I know that's something that I could talk for hours on that, on how events need to work, and that events in progress stuff and all the different techniques you can use to analyze events. So I won't take up too much time there, but yeah, I'll share the file for people that are interested. What am I doing? I'm finding Dr. Paul Nash. Oh, you've got an old LinkedIn profile here, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I found you.
Wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, it's okay. Here's his current one in the chat, Paul Nash's LinkedIn. So you can follow the doc. Yeah, reach out if you guys have any other questions or anything. Oh, here's some good stuff from John. Great presentation. Did some simplest for the Vic government. It was a one-off. Great structuring process optimized, looking for all the processes completely manual. Yeah, syntax in Nintex. Yeah, so Nintex workflow, right? Could have been easily, yeah. So that like Nintex is basically now Power Apps and Power Automate, because I think Nintex is gone. Microsoft kind of took over all of their capability into Power BI. Yeah, business process analysis package. Yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunity. Like, that's a paid, you know, PAF Now. I'm a big fan of PAF Now, and you know, I recommend their product, but I think there's opportunity there to use R visuals. Or Python visuals, or network graph, force-directed graphs and things like that, instead of the mining graph. And so, you know, like, whatever suits you, and you know, but you know, that free version of the PAF Now visual is so powerful. It's pretty cool. Sounds like we need a session for you on event processing. Yeah, maybe we can just talk about events in progress. Me and you, Sam Fisher. I know you love that.
Oh, mate, I've been getting all across that and all the other patterns in the DAX patterns book.
Yeah,
like,
DAX patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got it right here. DAX patterns. Buy it now.
Wait, hold on. Do you mean this book?
Yeah, nerds. That's what we are. That's funny.
Yeah.
I've gone electronic. I've got it on me Kindle, you know.
Well, I mean, if you're getting it on Kindle, like, you can also, for anyone else who doesn't want to actually pay for that book, this is the book that has pretty much all the awesome DAX patterns out there, including your old favorite, Greg, the events in progress. All that stuff is on the daxpatterns.com blog
Website
for free.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and yeah, I mean that SQLBI.com and DAX patterns, and they're really, really good resources for the up and coming Power BI person who's trying to learn these sorts of patterns. You're faced with these sort of data challenges, and we sort of spoke specifically about process, but yeah, there's a whole ton of things like basket analysis. New and returning customers is another really great pattern that you can use for all sorts of different scenarios, and you just look like a superhero to your business, and it takes you 20 minutes to set up. I love that kind of stuff.
Segmentation's a good one too.
Yeah, dynamic segmentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, the recording will be available when we stop recording, and it'll take Stream a little while to get its act together, but it should be available from this meeting, so you can just come back into the link and pick up the video, or I will probably post it to YouTube or something as well and give everybody a link. Thanks for coming. Great to see you all. Look after yourselves in lockdown. And if you're interested in this kind of stuff, or you're doing, I'd be really keen to do some proof of concepts with different businesses, and I think get Paul involved at doing that. Get him in. Let's have a look at a process. Let's try and optimize it. Use this pattern. I think that's an area that I'd be really interested. So if you've got that, let me know. Other than that, awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. That was great.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. I don't have a speaker next time, so if you want to speak, let me know. Sam?
Yeah. Mate, you joke, but I've actually been planning that in the background. We just got to get data clearance.
Oh, really? Oh, sick.
Yeah.
You're the best. All right.
Yeah.
I will harass you later.
Yeah.
Get
Good.
that data clearance. Tell me who I need to talk to, and I'll make it happen.
Well, I'm sure you could guess who.
Yeah, I know.
Who you'd have to talk to.
I know who I have to talk to. Yep.
Yeah. No, it's
Okay.
fine. Wheels are turning.
Cool. That's awesome. There's Manu, are you still here, or we want one from you as well, Manu? It's been a while since we've seen you. So Sam has been recorded volunteering. Yes, good work. Okay, I'll stop the recording now, and then we can start swearing. Okay, where am I at? Stop recording. All right, thanks, guys.
Okay.